So, good afternoon, everyone. As I said, today we're going to have our webinar around Google and Bing and generic campaigns on those platforms. As I said, generic campaigns. What does it actually mean? This is something we go through. We're going to have roughly, let's say, around 25 to 30 minutes today. It's not a complex topic. It's one that's fairly straightforward, and we just want to make sure that you understand what generic campaigns on Google actually mean. As I said, if you have any questions, feel free to always ask me via chat, and we can start going. So, I'm not sure of how many of you who dialed in already do any sort of Google AdWords campaigns with us. I think some of you do, and there are also some who don't, or at least not yet. I think with most of our hotels that we work together with, we do brand campaigns. So what's the difference between a brand and a generic campaign? And I gave you an example here on the screen. So if you talk about brand campaigns, this is really if someone searches for your hotel brand. So if you have a hotel name like Hotel I-31, someone goes on Google or Bing and types in Hotel I-31 or your hotel name, whatever it is. So it's a specific search for your hotel name and exactly what kind of name you have. So I just made an example of a hotel in Berlin, which is called Hotel California, right? And here we can see, okay, this is now a little bit special because Google is even on an incognito browser following me. But overall, you can see if you search for the term Hotel California Berlin, not on the first four advertisings, you don't see any of the hotel websites, but actually all the OTAs and other providers that are selling this hotel. So the problem is on brand terms that if someone searches for your hotel name, a lot of hotels ask us, why should I actually do that? Because usually I'm ranked number one on Google on the organic searches. Yeah, that's true. You might be number one on organic search, like you can see down here, but this is actually not number one, this is number 5. And the first 4 places are usually someone else. It's someone else selling you. So it's an Expedia or a Booking.com where you pay 20% commission. And they actually take away the customer right in front of your doorstep. They search for you and they are making advertising. So if someone goes to Booking and books your hotel, you're going to pay indirectly 15 to 20% to Booking. And that is not very smart. So when we speak to hotels to do Google advertising and on brand terms, really the whole idea is to actually shift business over from Google directly to your own website rather than having Booking and these guys in front of you. So again, for example, if I take a different example, which is the hotel of us in Hamburg, you can see, okay, on the first position, the first advertising is for East Hotel Hamburg is actually the East Hotel Hamburg and not Booking.com, which are now position number 2. And usually the cost per clicks for these kind of things are fairly low. And as you can see, I'm going back to my screen here. We see that on brand traffic, usually we have very high ROIs or average ROI on brand campaigns, or our average cost on brand campaigns is somewhere around 8%. So every booking you get through Google coming through brand advertising is for 8%. So if you compare that to Booking.com, if Booking.com would be position number 1 and takes that traffic away from you, you would indirectly pay 15 to 20%. So the savings we have for those hotels are quite significant. But on the other side, it's not new business. It's potentially business you would get anyway. So people would search for you, well, and they come to your website, okay, and then they book. So it's high conversion, high ROI, but the problem is it's fairly low traffic because it's the people that know you and that would come to you anyway. So it's basically the fish you would catch anyway, but you would catch them for a lower cost than through Booking.com and Expedia. That's a great thing, but it has limitations because you're not fishing for the fish that are actually out there and that don't know you yet. And this is quite simple if you see it out of a Google or Bing term, and that's where it's like a pyramid, right? The top level is brand, high ROI but low traffic. But if you want to have more traffic, you need to go into the so-called generic terms. So what is generic terms? This is, for example, On a low generic, this is what we call the generic long tail. If your hotel is somewhere in a specific location, yeah, maybe right at Piccadilly Circus, you would say a low generic term would be 3-star hotel near Piccadilly Circus. That is a low generic keyword. So very specific on location, very specific on where the hotel is and what kind of, let's say, stars the hotel has. A high generic keyword, it would be something like Hotel London, right, or Hotel Berlin. So that's very broad, yeah, and basically delivers on a high level a few thousand hotels to your selection. Logically, if you think about it, it's quite obvious that obviously, again, on low generic terms, there's again less traffic than on high generic terms, but more traffic than on your brand terms. So it's more traffic, but usually the ROIs are lower. Why? Because obviously people are still in the decision-making process. They might just be in the research process. So if you remember, and I think you've pretty much seen that before, I'm pretty sure, is that there is a customer journey, right? So on the customer journey, you start with travel inspiration, you go into research, you do the booking, then you arrive, and then you leave. This is the customer journey. So if you see this customer journey out of the typical, let's say, system where on which platforms people search, and again, this is potentially fairly one-dimensional. Of course, customer journey is far more complex, yeah, because people jump back and forth and they use hundreds of platforms potentially. But if you put it very simple, and all these online marketing gurus that write all fantastic blogs or whatever might prove me wrong if they want to, but in a nutshell, it comes down to travel inspiration is social platforms. So you're on Instagram, someone posts a great picture from whatever hotel somewhere in the mountains or on the Maldives, and you look at that picture and you're like, wow, this is where I want to go. And then once you have kind of like this idea in your head, you're like, okay, now I need to search. Now I want to go there. So I'm going to Ecuador next week. So when I was going to Ecuador, I was like, okay, first I got inspired, great. Now I need to do research. Where did I go for research? Of course, you go on Google, right? You go on the typical search engines. Social is not, our Instagram, Facebook are not platforms where you can search. Even if you want to, you can't. You cannot search for Hotel Maldives, or you cannot search for Hotel Ecuador. That's not possible. So obviously people go on search engines, and like the market share of Google is very high, but then Google, Bing, some might go on booking.com and OTAs directly, but still the entrance door to most of it is Google. And then you search for generic terms, right? You start with the high generic terms. You might say Hotel Ecuador or Hotel Quito, and then you drill down, and then you might say you go into the lower generic terms, and this is exactly the kind of search process you go through. And then at some point you might have decided for a hotel, and then you go back and talk to your husband and to your wife, and you're like, okay, I looked for that hotel, should I book that? And then maybe 2 days later, you go back on Google and you type in the hotel name as an advertising, you click on it and you book it. So in the booking process, it's more around the brand. So now the point is, if you go through that process, the question is, okay, if you only do brand advertising, okay, the strategy is make sure that people book directly with you and don't go anywhere else. But they come to you anyway. But those are obviously the few people who already know you. But if you want to expand that business, you need to move up the pyramid, and you need to go up to the generic terms. And the generic terms, again, deliver you more fish, but as I said, the ROIs are lower. So I put together some results, some screenshots I did a few minutes ago. This is again one hotel we're managing, and we started with brand terms. So on the top level, you can see the brand terms. This is a screenshot from our portal. So you get an exact brand breakdown on how each individual campaign on Google actually performs. And you can see this hotel, for example, in January had 379 clicks on brand terms, on the English brand terms, on the English brand campaign. You can also distinguish between languages, obviously, in Google and so on, and point of sale. Yeah, and here you can see conversion rate is 6.3, and the cost, the revenue generated out of 655 euro was 9,000. So the actual cost of that campaign is 5.8%. So that's great. We did brand advertising, and if that customer hadn't come through the brand and hadn't come through the website, but through booking.com, I would have paid 10% more. And those 10% in that case is 900 euro. So the profit savings, just on 1 month, just in that one hotel, on that campaign, was 900 euro. And that's quite amazing, right? Because, and on top of that, you have people coming through your brand. On the other side, then the hotel looked at those results in the previous month, and we had those results every month. Every month we were at 5%, 6%, 5%, 6%. But then the hotel said, look, I want to have more business because I'm willing maybe to pay 10% cost, but then I want to have more revenue. So we looked at it and we said, okay, in that case, we need to go into generic terms. So we started a generic campaign, and you can see one of the generic campaigns is a screenshot. So we got immediately 790 clicks, so almost twice as much than on the brand campaign itself. And we were very conservative on the generic campaign, but the cost was already 1,100, and you can see here the revenue was 2,867. So obviously a much lower return of investment or a cost ratio of 31%. If you nevertheless look at the last line, and this is the total result of that hotel of all campaigns, so up here I only gave you one brand and one generic. In total they have several brands and several generics because it depends on the country, the location, and so on. But in total the hotel spent actually 4,800 and made 40,000 and had a cost ratio on total of 9.5%. So that's a great result because the hotel was really like, okay, cool. But, and that's always the way we see it, is like, okay, if we only look at the generic campaign, 31% would have been too high. So theoretically, we would have to stop it because it's more expensive than Booking or Expedia. But the brand terms were doing very well. And on average, we were at 10%. So we always look at the total results, but obviously you have the transparency of how much goes into where based on the individual campaigns. So now how is that connected and how does it work? If you go back to our customer journey, you can see that people obviously go through all these different platforms, right? They go on Google and they search for Hotel Berlin, and then they go for a hotel near the train station, and then they go for Hotel I-31, and then they book. If they book, the booking is always credited to the last keyword. So that's usually the standard how most of the marketing agencies do it. They say, look, the last click that came to your website and the last advertising that got that click is getting the credit for the booking. So obviously, if someone searched for several keywords before and they might have clicked on several advertisings before, you obviously don't see that, but you can see that you have to pay for all these advertising clicks, but only the brand campaign actually did the conversion. And here I can tell a little story of my time because I was running the e-commerce for the Hilton hotels in Europe 10 years ago. And we had a similar situation. We had a situation, I think in Germany, we spent around 100,000 euros a month on Google AdWords. And of that money, roughly 50% went on brand advertising and 50% went on generic. So a little bit like here, we had two lines and it was the same result. Brand was very, very good, a low cost ratio, and generic was a very high cost ratio. Now came a problem because someone didn't approve the budgets. Big hotel chain, budgets need to be approved, lots of complications, a lot of administration. So my boss told me, look, we don't have any budget. We need to turn off the campaigns, or at least we need to turn off everything that is not profitable. So what we did is, obviously, we looked at it and we saw generic campaigns have bad results, brand campaign have good results, so let's turn off generic. So we turned off generic completely and only spent money on brand. So what happened in the last months was obviously that our total ROI improved quite a lot actually. But the problem was that we had 50% less volume on the brand campaign. So the brand campaign, which potentially generated €1 million revenue before, only came back with a 500,000 revenue on a really good ROI, but instead of spending 50,000, we only spent maybe 20. So what happened here was a causal relationship. You could see by turning off generic, you were turning off the water at the beginning of the customer journey, so the water didn't trickle down to the booking phase. So people actually didn't even arrive on the brand. And that was a clear proof of concept that generic is actually driving business to your brand website. And if you stop generic, the water is not going through, the water is not finding its way, and it might go somewhere else. It might go to your competitor, or again, to Booking.com and Expedia. So it's quite important to see the relationship. There are quite a lot of very smart online marketing people out there. And they might all call you and they say, yeah, what Uli Kastner is saying, that's technically correct, but it's incomplete. Because actually you can measure in Google which keyword is clicked first and second and third and fourth. And then you can go through and you can actually see which keyword was actually influencing the next keyword search and the next keyword search. This is a so-called attribution model. So you can not only look when you track, not only the booking goes to the last click, but you can also see which advertisings have been clicked before. And then you can go there and you can say, look, okay, if this influences that and that influences this, then you can kind of like make a strategic advertising and measure everything. So absolutely, these online marketing gurus are correct. And it's absolutely correct that you can do that. But now we are talking about individual hotels. And we're talking about fairly small budgets, usually budgets somewhere between 500 euro and 5,000 euros a month, generating between, let's say, 500 clicks and 10,000 clicks a month. Statistically, this is very small. The problem is with small data is that if you want to do statistics like the attribution model, you need a lot of data and you need a lot of clicks. And we don't have that. So for many hotels, doing this kind of attribution analysis would actually be completely out of scope. So, okay, you can do it. But if you break down the data and if you look at the data gets so small that it doesn't give you reasonable answers. So even though, yes, okay, a guru is a guru and they know everything. But on the other side, when it comes to BI and business intelligence and data analysis, then very often they are not that smart. And we are more data analysts. So we sometimes are like, okay, if something does not deliver you enough data, you need to go with your instinct, unfortunately. Yeah. So, but there is a clear causal relationship between generic and brand. And there are ways to measure it, but maybe not on a pure data and click-based model, but also obviously in a little bit, it's a little bit trial error partially, and it's a little bit like educated guessing that you need to bring along. But the good thing is, because we're doing this for several hundred hotels, this is something we are quite familiar with. We fairly much know what influences what else, and to drive that business through that kind of management is very often, even though if you don't have enough data, can be very, very successful if you're knowledgeable, if you know the destination, if you know the hotel business, if you know Google. This is usually something where you can drive a lot, and this is actually the main benefit that myhotelshop has, that we have so many hotels where we can compare data with and then apply this knowledge to each individual. So what is important for generic campaigns? I mentioned it before, and there are several points, but one thing I haven't mentioned so far is that if you do generic advertising, you need to have very, very good landing pages. So let me give you that example of, let's search for hotels near Piccadilly Circus. And of course, position number 1, Booking.com. So you click on that. Okay, this is now in German, sorry for that. But when you click on that, and even for the ones who don't speak German, you can already, when you read it, you can see it. Hold on, let me switch the language quickly. Here we go. So what can you see is looking for hotels near Piccadilly Circus in the search bar, and even the picture of Piccadilly Circus on the back. This is a highly, let's say, a relevant landing page, because the client actually looked for Piccadilly Circus, he looked for hotels, and he gets on a website where he can book hotels on Piccadilly Circus without a lot of effort. So that's what I'm always telling to my hotels. If they really want to go into generic campaigns and they want to target specific keywords, it's very stupid to actually put the click on your homepage, right, to your start page of your website. It's much better actually to create sub-websites, so landing pages, subdomains, where you can actually deliver content that is created specifically for that keyword. Booking.com, they don't have people who built these subpages. They actually have billions of subpages like that. Based for every keyword on Google, Booking has an individualized landing page generated by an artificial intelligence. So that's actually where Booking really has a major advantage, because what happens here is you pay a lot of money for generic terms, The cost per click for generic terms is very high. So you don't really want to lose a customer once they clicked on your advertising. And the more relevant you are and the better the landing page, the more likely the customer is clicking on the search button and is actually booking a room. So that's super, super, super important. And so I can always urge you, and this is something that we do together with our clients, that we really try to build customized landing pages that are really relevant for the customer, because in the end, it's always about relevancy. And think about yourself, right? If you look for a new mobile phone or a washing machine, I think it's always important that you get on a landing page where you can actually find that specific washing machine. And if you can't, the one thing you click is the red X on the browser and you're gone. And then you paid for the cost per click on Google and nothing is coming out of it. So it's very important to have a good landing page. Maybe if you have an offer on the landing page, something specific on your landing page, even better. So if you have offers, give it to them. If you have individual content, pictures specific to the keyword, text specific for the keyword, right? This is important. And of course, page speed, right? I mean, a page that is loading very slowly is not very trustworthy and people get annoyed, specifically on mobile. Yeah. And that's maybe additionally, when you speak about very good landing pages, I mean, your landing pages need to be mobile friendly, right? Because if you don't have mobile friendly websites and landing pages, far more than 50% of all the clicks from Google and Bing are actually coming from mobile phones. And number 5, and this is obviously where myhotelshop comes into the game, you need to have a good budget in bid management, because specifically on generic campaigns, you don't want to spend thousands of euros that don't give you an ROI. So you need to have a very, very precise budget management. That budget is allocated very well and is not kind of like, is not really, let's say, open. And because on generic terms, you can spend a lot of budget. And of course, you need a good bid management, because Google is an auction model. And that means that you have to pay for the click and you need to decide if you want to be on position 1, 2, 3, or 4. So, and here on generic terms, it's quite important to actually have a good bid management in place. So you're at the right position at the right time in the right context. So this is something that we do. This is something we do very, very precisely, because here lies the magic for a good return of investment. And last but not least, obviously, you need tracking, right? If you can't measure it, don't do it. And on the tracking part, this is something that we are very sophisticated. So it's very important to see exactly how people react. With most of our clients, we now even go down the line where we measure offline revenue, because many people, specifically on certain, let's say, with wellness hotels or more complex hotel products, people go through Google, they click on the advertising, then they come on the landing page. But in the end of the day, they call you. So they go on your website, they click your telephone, and then they call you, and then they book. What we measure now is if people click on an advertising on Google, come on your website, book online, or if they actually book through the telephone. And that has very, very interesting features, because we noticed that on some hotels, sometimes we even had on one online booking, we actually had 2 telephone bookings. And that's a very important revenue driver. So obviously we want to drive revenue through your website, but on some products, telephone is still a very, very relevant channel. So coming to the end, what is the benefit of generic campaigns? Well, as I mentioned, fish where the fish are and go for new fish. So find customers at the beginning of the customer journey. Do it slowly, go through long tail, through low generic terms, and quickly, or as good as your ROI is, drive up to more high generic keywords. Increase your brand awareness through that. Obviously, if you position your brand in generic advertising, there's also indirectly can increase your brand awareness to people that haven't seen you before. But more important is that you start the funnel, right? Because if you're there, people find you, and once they found you, they come back. And then they might drive through the brand campaigns, with the example that I had from from Hilton before. And last but not least, a big benefit is also that you can also target new segments. We have a lot of hotels that now started to do advertising on mice, so meeting incentive, or they also want to do advertising around vouchers because they want to sell vouchers for Valentine's Day, or some people even want to target special segments like bicycle drivers or motorway or motorcycle drivers, or you name it, there's so many segments in the hotel industry with which people you can target. So that is obviously quite an interesting thing, because the good thing is on search engines, people tell you what they look for. They type it into the search engine and tell you exactly what they're looking for. And you can target each individual keyword and to deliver, let's say, a relevant message to these people. And that's the great thing about Google. So that's really what it's all about generic campaigns. Like I said, 25 minutes. So this is really important to understand the dynamics between brand and generic. That brand potentially is great on ROI, but potentially not enough to actually get the fish that you really want. The generic can drive you really a lot of business into your brand indirectly in the long run. And that the ROI, if you have a good landing page and a good conversion rate, can be very high across the board. As I said, with all of our hotels, and I think we have around 450 or almost 500 hotels that we run Google AdWords with, is that the average cost is actually somewhere around 8.5. And like I said before, this is actually not good, because we might drive twice as much revenue to those hotels by only increasing the cost maybe from 8% to 10 or 11, which is still much cheaper than anything you pay on Booking and Expedia. So this is something where we slowly and gradually educate our clients to drive up their spend to generic keywords and to make sure that we get fish that we haven't got before. So in case you have any questions, feel free to use the chat. We are now open. I'm done. And if you have any questions, feel free to use the chat and ask, and I'm happy to answer. In the meantime, while you might be typing, let me briefly go to the last slide, because, hold on, this is German, so I put this in English, Tuesday. Whoever comes to ITB, I'm not sure who is coming to ITB beginning of March. ITB starts on the 4th of March, so the day before ITB starts, we do a little event in Berlin. It's called hdf-berlin.com. Whoever comes to Berlin is more than invited to join. It's a small event. It starts at 3:30 in the afternoon and it goes until 7. Afterwards, we have some food and some drinks for you. So we have 4 very, very interesting speakers. We talk about chatbots. We talk about a hotel that is actually closed Booking.com 4 months ago, and we present the results, what happened to that hotel. We talk about revenue management and artificial intelligence and revenue management, and also we make a little recap on how important reviews still are in 2020. So quite some interesting topics, very brief, very to the point. So if you come to ITB, you're more than invited. Other than that, I haven't seen any questions coming in so far. So I guess you got all the information you needed. It's Friday afternoon. I think all of you are more than happy to go home maybe, or finalize your work and go home. So I wish you a beautiful weekend, and hopefully see you at ITB. Thanks a lot.